Live.
Okay.
Hey everybody, it's Cheryl Lawson. Hey, thanks for joining us for part 2 of our methylation status discussion. I'm here with Gregg Hill again. Thanks for joining us, Gregg.
Cheryl?
So I thought we would, and so the Q&A is open for this hangout this time. Yay, we got that to work.
Great. Well, we had such a great discussion last time, and we had Regina as the expert. You had a great opportunity to ask questions, and I think this is a really nice follow-up to talk about the concepts we discussed before, sort of the beginning points, what we can expect through the middle of this, and because you and I talked about this, Cheryl. Really, when it comes down to it, we all kind of have our own health issues we're dealing with. Some of us have sort of more advanced diagnostics, some of us less, but we're all trying to find a great way to understand this and become educated and help each other and sort of further the community.
Absolutely. It was really interesting. We had a few people watching last time live, but a lot of people watched the YouTube video afterwards. So I'm really encouraged that we're reaching a lot of people like us who are doing just what you said. So I want to get into maybe a little bit of a recap, but can you tell a little bit more of your story and kind of how your personal journey has been?
Yeah, I will. Thanks for asking. I sort of touched on this last week, but I became really excited about this, not only from a standpoint of being a health provider and trying to make improvements in our population and our communities, but what I found out is as we got deeper into this and started discussing this with the experts is I wanted to find out really how to become, the healthiest person I can be. So, I talked about last time, this coming July, next month, I'll turn 50 years old. And I am only in this, been sort of interested in health and nutrition and wellness for about the last 10, 11, 12 years. And so before that, I absolutely had no idea what I was doing. I was just sort of yet another person in Western society, eating a Western diet and exhibiting Western problems, including pain in my feet and indigestion and lack of energy and abdominal obesity and all of these different things that at the time, I didn't really know how much they were putting a strain on my life. But as I started finding out and getting interested, about 10 years ago, I got into health and nutrition, lost a bunch of weight, and it was really from a standpoint of just trying to become a strength trainer and learn about how to lift weights and become healthy and look good at the beach and all that. So that all worked great. The interesting thing is, as I learned about new diets, Mediterranean diets, and I transitioned through veganism and through vegetarianism, landed on what we now call a paleo diet or a whole foods diet. I became what I thought to be a very, very healthy person. Felt great. I do yoga every day. I'm able to chase my 4 children around and have a great relationship with my wife and very active. And what I found out after this is, as I started getting some of my blood work done and looking at some of the inflammatory markers, there were big red flags and warning signs that said, hey, despite how you look, how you feel, how you conduct your life from a dietary and from a performance standpoint, there's something else in there. And until we started understanding that from the the blood chemistry, we didn't really have sort of the stimulation to go to the next step and look at further back into some of the genetic components and all of the things, all of the factors that lead us to having either optimal health or suboptimal health. And so that's sort of my background. It's been a long, long journey, and most of that learning has just occurred probably within the last year, I got to tell you. To when we determined as a team to set down this path and learn a lot about it. And one of the big elevated markers that I found was that homocysteine marker. We talked about it last time. Again, it was one of those that was sort of as a primary provider, not something I would typically order on patients. But as we start looking and sort of peeling away the onion skin and learning more about how complex some of these issues can be, this sort of bubbled to the top, and sure enough, there was a good reason for it. And the genetics, as you and I were talking about, sort of completed that puzzle.
Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting that we went through kind of the plan that once you go through the methyl status that we're talking about with Regina, you get this report that is broken down into these really wonderful, I like to call them chewable categories, right? Something that you can see and associate with yourself. And you mentioned one of them, which is, I think, food and how we metabolize the food that we eat. So I guess that's my first question is, how does, what we eat and the food, how does your DNA affect or impact the way you metabolize certain foods?
Right. It's actually the perfect question to ask because, when we, again, we are working within an environment and a population and a community that is very, very much sort of on that cusp of taking charge of their own health. We've had many changes in legislation with healthcare and where we get it, how it's financed. And so we're actually at a really great time where people are starting to kind of take notice and take that ownership. And so to answer your question, how does food play a part in this? Well, food is absolutely critical because food is a drug, which is why it shows up on the Food and Drug Administration as, one of those key words. It's critical to be eating the right things and, of course, not be putting in the wrong things. And so one of the interesting things that, I think I'm sharing right now, this copy. Let me see if I can get there we go. Can you see that there, Cheryl?
I can't see it. It's a little small, so if you can...
Small. Okay, so I'm going to try and blow this up just so everybody has an opportunity to take a peek at this. But this right here, this is essentially a breakdown of my genetics that's in what are called functional groups. And so if you take a look, right off the bat here, food responses. Can you see that there okay,
yes.
Cheryl?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the food responses, right off the bat, we can take a look at some of my my DNA, and you see I've got 2 red dots, which essentially means that I have the homozygous or the affected risk factor for, in this case, what's called a fatty acid desaturase 1. Big long word, but essentially this means that I have a ability to break down and metabolize my omega-3 fatty acids and fish oils and some of all the healthy things that come in a Mediterranean diet. I have less of an ability to do that than my peer group. And so, when we take a look at some of the data here, I'm not one of those people that can just say, well, you know what, follow a Mediterranean style life or Mediterranean diet lifestyle, eat plenty of omega-3, fatty acids and olive oils and fish. Well, I'm going to need to do that a little more seriously and kind of take a different approach than what my peer group may be, what my peer group may be doing. And so, that's one of those things that, becomes really, really critical is that, we understand what our genetics tells us about, the kind of food that we, that we can eat, that we should eat, how effective you are at metabolizing that food. One of the markers that I shared on there as well talks about just what the mix of carbohydrate versus fat versus protein, it takes all that guesswork because we look at all of these different pieces of information and we say, gosh, I'm a fat metabolizer. Do I do really well with proteins or carbohydrates? Well, we try it by sort of going into trial and error and seeing how I feel after I've eaten a certain thing, or if I eliminate certain foods from my diet, how does that affect us? And with the power of having advanced diagnostics and genetics and things like that, it really can kind of tie some of these things together. Not necessarily closing the case on it, but at least you can say, well, research has suggested I have this this profile that makes this more difficult, and certainly enough, I see that the way I feel, the way I look, am I processing these things right? Are my inflammatory markers high or are they low? It's just very interesting that we now have some ability to sort of dig deeper in that and understand it quite a bit more.
Right. Well, I like the fact that you talked about food and from a how I feel standpoint, as opposed to what most of us are interested in is the losing weight and looking good at the beach, and there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. But I think the bigger picture is how do you feel? Are you feeling better? And it appears that the science here, when you combine your DNA and your own chemistry, kind of helps you to notice what you're most likely to metabolize and how, like you said, the Mediterranean diet may need to be a little bit more serious for you, but also, you can also now check 6 months later, 90 days later, 45 days later, how do you feel versus how your actual chemistries come out when you retest or when you check again, right?
Yeah, yeah, indeed. Well, I mean, it's a great point, because that's one of those things that's absolutely critical as well. As you say, well, just we've already talked about, despite the way you feel, if you feel great, it doesn't necessarily let you off the hook. I mean, there may be something out there. There may be a deficiency in a vitamin or a factor or cofactor you may be missing, something you may be eating too much of. You may be drinking milk and have a poor tolerance to lactose. And so one of the, again, kind of getting back to the food element and trying to understand, well, I know this about myself by my genetics. I know the way I feel. I know I have a family predisposition, and this is kind of the way I live my life. There's a significant opportunity for people that are trying to make a positive difference to just say, well, yeah, the jury may still be out on, is gluten a good thing or is it a bad thing? Or should we be eating all, veganism or non? Or should it be paleo or non-paleo? Or, and everybody's going to lay on each side of the fence. But the fact of the matter is, if we organically, as a population, look at our diet and say, okay, well, what are the true things that are important and are sustaining? I kind of lead back to it being a whole food diet, which means it's going to be something that came from, again, I used it last week to say something from God's good earth. So if it's from, a grass-fed, maybe grass-fed beef or organic poultry or wild-caught seafood, then of course leafy greens, and a lot of them. That's where most of our folate comes from, and folate, of course, being the root word being foliage, sort of goes hand in hand with those leafy greens. So plenty of vegetables, organic vegetables and fruits, and then of course nuts and seeds. And if we take a look at those whole foods and we make those the staples and really look at vegetables being the key, and then adding a little bit of these healthy proteins, we're going to have like some significant opportunity to say, gosh, does this work? And it's as simple as trying it and see if it does. And if you feel great, then at least you've kind of checked that off the list, and we can kind of continue down to say, well, what vitamins do you need to be absolutely optimal? Is it going to be a vitamin B6, 12? And that's where as we go down and we look at some of these the blood chemistries and some of the other aspects of testing that are really demonstrative of that and can help us sort of get in that right space.
Right. So I guess the next thing on the list, and I'm thank you for sharing your results on screen. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah,
I did share some of mine. I shared some of mine last week, and one of our team members is like, I was trying to catch it so I could give you some advice. So it's great to have so many resources within our own team, and hopefully we can share some of those with the people who are watching. I noticed the next section on the report that we get from Regina has weight loss, and I don't know. Can you tell me a little bit about how? Does that say, your ability to lose weight? Does it say how fast you're going to lose weight? How does the DNA tell me about weight loss? What does it tell me about weight loss?
Yeah, well, it's somewhat disconnected, but here's the great news. Again, we always draw back to that word metabolism, because metabolism is really sort of the sum of all of the things going on in your body, things that are being built up by nutrients and other things going on within your body, and then, of course, things being broken down. And the sort of the net effect is this metabolism. And so weight loss is one of those things that happens to be a consequence of how you diet. And of course, if you're at that optimal weight and you say, well, gosh, I'd like to have even a better diet and achieve some weight loss, someone may look at you and say, you know what, that wouldn't be really productive because you're already at this optimal weight. So what you're of course talking about a subject that is is key and paramount in many people's minds, because they say, gosh, you know, really, I just like to lose some weight, because typically that lower weight sort of corresponds with feeling better and having less, you know, issues and disease and things like that. And sure enough, there is a, you know, a correlation, and then of course we have to like figure out what the causation is. So as far as it being indirect, it, you know, works from a standpoint of, you look at your DNA and you say, okay, well, here's the optimal way I can feed myself, and I can give myself the right nutrients, and how I am either a, you know, a slow muscle mover or a fast muscle mover. And all of these factors kind of determine how you're going to work out, what, you know, what time of the day you're going to work, how you metabolize your food, what foods you should or shouldn't eat. Of course, water and moisture is, again, key and critical to all of this process. And so the very real fact is, from an organic standpoint, if you eat right, if you're drinking your water, if you're exercising appropriately, and you kind of have some of the secrets unlocked, to where we say, well, we know just a little bit more through, you know, some of your inflammatory diagnostics or from your genetics, where you can really kind of make it you know, sort of this critical mass. That's when the weight loss occurs. And again, you know, weight loss is just that byproduct of eating the right thing. And then, of course, there's going to be that population that we say, you really shouldn't be losing weight. We need to put some weight on you, but appropriately.
Right. So, you know, I think that was one of the keys that I got from our conversation with Regina, was that a lot of the stuff is connected, but it's not mutually exclusive, right? It's not, you know, one or the other.
That's right. Yeah.
If you eat better and eat the things, or, you know, that metabolize best for you, that your optimal diet. And so maybe the paleo diet isn't best, but maybe there's some pieces of that you would work best for you. And then once you start eating the right way, all of a sudden you start feeling better. Yeah. Then you'll have the energy to exercise more, and it kind of just all works itself out, and then weight loss happens to be the byproduct, or, you know, better skin or more energy, or, you know, those kind of things just become a part of feeling better and eating and processing the way your body is optimal, right? Yeah, for sure. Yep. So I think the next thing I think we didn't really touch on as much, I think, as the MTHFR community would probably like us to, but I know that's part, methylation and MTHFR is part of the report that we're looking at, and so when somebody knows, you know, I have MTHFR mutation, or I have a certain mutation, what does the chemistry, and we talked about this really early today, what does the chemistry add to that discussion or that diagnosis that the DNA can't or doesn't? Yeah, again, another great question, because when you look at your DNA is sort of what we call, you know, it's really your blueprint. When we print out your DNA, that's what it is. It's not going to change tomorrow, and you know, it's not changed from what it was yesterday. All but with some very, very minor, you know, little snips that kind of break, you know, during your life cycle. But anyway, that's something that, again, you're born with, and, you know, whether or not you manifest the effects of that, you know, there's a lot that we can do as human organisms to influence that, the way we feel, and again, you know, what we're eating, how we're supporting just our genetics for them to be able to do their job. Mm-hmm. Now, that's an interesting thing, because you say, well, gosh, here's your blueprint. We know about you, but to really understand the balance sheet, which is what you look like today, how, you know, exactly what's going on within you, then we would have to do the biochemistry, you know, on a case-by-case basis. So we have quite a great opportunity with our experts at StepOne Health. We usually meet probably 2 to 3 times a week, you know, from a discussion panel, and of course, you know, everybody doing their own research. But it's been found that, you know, inflammation and the inflammatory process is really where all disease process stems, and so clamping down on that and cutting down on, you know, things that inflame, that insult the body, that aggravate us, you know, that's really what we're trying to achieve. And again, as a community, we all sort of land in the same place, and we say, gosh, here's what I know about myself. I've got this, you know, genetic variant, and I've got this blood marker, and this is the way I feel.
where do I go next? You know, is there a doctor in my town? Can I do this? Can I do that? And that's, you know, probably the biggest difficulty for people is trying to figure out where to go next. And so one of the great things that, you know, we've kind of discussed as an expert panel, and we've discussed with, you know, many other experts as well, is this really comes down to, you know, what's going on with the gut, you know, so what's going on in your tummy, how you're eating, you know, what you're eating, what you're not eating, and, you know, that's a very, very important place for us to kind of understand. And so what we like to do is sort of advise people to do almost like a look at a toxin status, if you will. Mm-hmm. Try to figure out if there's a detoxification element that is missing in, you know, in our clients, so they can take advantage. Now, not to direct in any one direction or another, because there are so many different, you know, plans on how to detoxify, but one of the most important that can be done right off the bat that's totally safe and without consequences, that food elimination. It's just literally trying to say, okay, if we know a little bit about, you know, somewhat of the population has an issue with, you know, processing different types of food products, whether it's bread or cheese or milk, maybe the possibility to eliminate that and see how the gut reacts, and you know, how your tummy feels, how you're you know, going to the bathroom, number one, number two, all of the status of you know, the way you move food in, move food out, and sweat and everything else is again absolutely key to kind of determining, you know, where you are in that health continuum.
Right. So I like that, you know, eliminating food or eliminating items, the detox profile. I love that. We need to write that. Yeah, so, but I think, you know, one of the things that showed up, and I showed my results last week. I won't go too far into my results, but one of mine was coffee, and so you know, Brigitte kind of called me to, you know, a little bit later to make sure I wasn't, you know, jumping off the roof and throwing everything out of my refrigerator. You know, it's just like, okay, Cheryl, I know we've talked about this and what you need to do, but I was able to kind of cut down on coffee already to 1 cup, and now, you know, try to eliminate it completely in the day and kind of switch to tea and some other things. And so it is something that a lot of people will need to do. I know one of our team members sent the email because a couple of us have issues with sugar, right? You know, and so we're looking at the option of, you know, doing the 30-day, you know, sugar-free.
Absolutely, yeah.
Getting rid of sugar. Now, are those kinds of things? I know you said they're affordable. I mean, are those kind of things recommended? Is, you know, first eliminate the things that make you icky?
Yeah, it really is. And the funny thing is, you know, there's so much discussion around detox and you know, what the programs are, whether it's doing it with apple cider vinegars so we can stimulate bile from gallbladder, you know, all of these different things that can assist. But if we're, you know, if we kind of take a step back, it's just like we do in anything in primary medicine. You know, asthma is a perfect example. You take a look at the status of a patient and understand where they are, and we move through that continuum in a stepwise basis. So we understand, and we don't kind of throw everything at them at once and go, gosh, I don't know which one of these things worked. And from that stepwise standpoint, if you're able to do that, you know, especially from a food elimination aspect first, you know, it's very, very safe, and in many cases, you know, within about sometimes 3, sometimes 5 weeks, the changes can be very, very profound, and in a lot of cases can be long-lasting. Because, you know, understanding methylation is one of those things, especially, you know, the community with which we're sharing this. A lot of people have read up on it and kind of understand it's again a biochemical process that's instrumental in almost everything that's going on in your body. It's going on 1 billion times, you know, every second. And, you know, just to your point, talking about coffee or some of the things we may like in the way of sugars and alcohols, these are all things that will suck up those methyl groups. And once those things are bound and they're kind of out of the population of sort of availability, your body doesn't have that left to do its work. And so many different things, many different toxins will suck up those methyl groups and make those unavailable to do the work. And at the very least, instead of trying to supplement to, kind of get that methylation status back humming along, at the very least we can eliminate the things that steal those methyl groups and, possibly add some stability just from doing that.
I think one of the conversations we've had is that, I felt a lot better in my 20s and 30s, right? But I also did a lot of things in my 20s and 30s that I probably shouldn't have done, but I still felt better, eating, exercising entirely too much, wearing, running through the airport with my high heels on, carrying my luggage, all luggage on my shoulders, right? I mean, those are things that now I feel, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Are we borrowing from our health and when we're younger, so that once we get to a certain age, we just don't have it to borrow? Is that what's really happening?
Again, I'm going to be kind of unclear here. It's a yes and no. I mean, the fact is, whether we enjoy looking at the aspects of anti-aging medicine, which is a real field, and it's actually got some decent literature there, but we are aging and moving into the future, and essentially breaking down and eroding our tissues. So yeah, our goal here is to get our body, the way we work and the way we eat and the way we move all the time, to be so optimally driven and fed that sort of that inflammatory process sort of sputters out at the very end, and at whatever it is, year 110 is when we crash out and felt good at our 110th birthday party.
Absolutely. Hey, I'm signing up for that. So I want to remind everybody that that may be watching or even watch the recording that you're welcome to ask a question. You just hit the little Q&A button over to the right and ask a question, or you can ask a question in the at the bottom of our hangout. I'll check and see if anybody has asked questions at all. Nope, not yet, but we'll carry on. Again, if you'd like to sign up, we have limited invitations, but we are opening up invitations to people to go through the methylation status or the methyl status experience with Regina, so that you get one of these wonderful reports yourself and get an opportunity to speak with her and go through some of the options that you have, including the food, weight loss, the methylation, MTHFR. One of the things, too, that is included on the report is the type 2 diabetes, right, or your diabetic markers. Can you explain a little bit about what DNA can tell us about either our risk factors or how we're able to know whether or not we're in jeopardy of diabetes?
Yeah, so if we wanted to take a look here, let's see here. If we go, can you see my screen right now, Cheryl? I guess I'm off, huh? I gotta share this thing so you can see this.
Yeah.
There we go. Try this out and see if that works. Okay, how's that work?
I got it. Make it a little larger.
A little larger. Okay.
Perfect.
There we go. Yeah, what's really great about the way, so we've done quite a bit of development as we chatted about on trying to determine which one of the relevant SNPs here are sort of significant for the functional group. And so when we start up at the top here, we originally talked about these food responses, and many of these genes here, that we talked about, these will show up in other areas, and so it's not necessarily that they're mutually exclusive here. But what's been nice, that's really powerful, is putting it into these functional groups. So the food response area is one functional group, the weight management's another functional group, and then some of the areas where risk factors for type 2 diabetes, there are certain genes that play a really big part in that. And so when you're able to take a look and understand that you have, some of these markers, and if you've got a double homozygous here like I do, and an increased risk for metabolic syndrome, I have, one of those sort of bad news markers that makes the processing and me watching my sugars quite a bit more important than my peer group. And so it's again one of those things that's really amazing that we can do now, because we never had that opportunity in the past. I mean, it's, we just sort of guessed at it, and then, once we've developed some of these diseases, then we're throwing medications at it to simply mask the symptoms, instead of organically going back to the root, going, as I call it, back upstream to figure out, how we can make these fundamental changes to where our body is processing its nutrients in the right way, it's managing its sugars the right way, and we don't have that inflammatory insult that is, the thing that's kind of dragging the body down and making you feel just generally lousy.
Right. Well, I think that's a really critical point I know for me personally, in just kind of understanding. I think one of the things that's that is enlightening for me is not that these are things that are new, right? I know my diet needs to change, as most people know, but then knowing where to go, which direction. I think one of our team members called it like the owner's manual, right? So
yeah,
you kind of either throw things at it and see which works, or you can actually read the owner's manual and see specifically how to become, the optimal shareholder.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, it's a perfect way to put it, and it really, it's a great way of putting it, because we are all, born, and we have been given cursory education, and we're highly influenced by by a number of different factors, from school to government and everything else. And the very real fact is, we're just starting, or I shouldn't say we're just starting, we are starting to recognize now how important some of these complementary aspects of understanding our health can be. Which is just why it's so refreshing now. One of the most important things that we're trying to put together, within StepOne Health, is that ability for our clients and our consumers to have that ownership and that power to understand and make those changes. And then, of course, these are things that can be recognized over a lifetime, and within our suite, just to make sure that we can measure and remeasure, and you're able to see these changes in a phenomenally powerful way, as you go through life.
And I think having the baseline number, my mom's done it, I've done it, my younger brother's done it. So having where you start, and that's part of the methyl status experience that we're offering, is knowing what your numbers are today, whether you've already done your DNA testing, or whether you're just getting started, kind of understanding your own personal health. Yeah. I know it's important, because I've kind of gone through it, and now I'm a little obsessed about it.
Yes.
But how important is just knowing, what your numbers look like today?
Yeah, well, it's one of those things that's important enough that every employer group across the country, all benefits consultants, everybody knows the importance of at least understanding certain baseline numbers. And so we've assembled a suite of 65 measures that kind of look at all of not only the standard measures, but ensuring that we're looking at some of the cardiovascular markers from a lipid standpoint, and looking at fasting blood sugars, and just kidney function, liver function. These are all things that from a baseline standpoint, which is why we call it the baseline, at least as you take a look at that from a fasting standpoint, you can say, okay, there aren't any huge surprises here, or maybe there are some things that are not necessarily surprises, but you go, well, I sort of knew that. Now, what can I do to change this? Because there are so many things that we've dealt with in the past, and been said, well, you're gonna have to live with this, and here's your medication, and it's not necessarily the case. We still encourage working closely with a qualified medical practitioner, but at the very least, we have a great suite of educational resources and testing capabilities, and things that can, again, the only as David Clymer, our principal, has said, the only thing common in your healthcare is you. And so once people start kind of understanding that they are the owner of their health and their record. How many people have never seen their health lab? It's sitting at the doctor's, and it's not their lab, it's your lab. And so this is an important time for us to as a community, start taking that ownership.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's all we had to talk about today. Can you believe that?
Hey, it was great. It's always good, and I'd like to, if we can, try and do it like once a week. And this is a great community, and everybody is at a different level of education and skill set, me included. And so as we learn, we may go a little deeper. We may find some subject matter that the community says, "Hey, really hit on this one thing here," and we'll try to draw together the experts and the resources to make it enjoyable and make it worthwhile and super valuable.
I agree. I think, one of the things I think the community will want to talk about, and because we've talked about it as we kind of get further into the discussion ourselves and me personally, is that detox conversation.
Yes.
I think, we talked about some, really simple ways to just going to eliminate food, but there are some protocols out there that, some are great and some are probably not so great. And so I'd love to maybe talk a little bit more about some of the protocols to detoxing, and I know that's usually the first step, right?
Yeah, that's right. As a matter of fact, our clinical team right now is doing some of the research, and we're going to have a really nice discussion, sort of an all hands this coming Wednesday evening. So maybe by next week we'll know quite a bit more as well. There's so many different ideas and approaches to detox, and it's an interesting subject because the elimination detox we just talked about. I mean, even under that, despite me saying it's safe, I mean, abruptly cutting off caffeine and coffee, that can make you feel really lousy. And so, for me to make a blanket statement and say, okay, it's totally safe, you're not going to feel any of the effects. Well, there is some fallout despite it being, kind of in a healthy direction. And so, it is safe to sort of wean on some of these things to make it a little bit more of a transition. And then there are other more aggressive detoxes that involve taking certain, supplements and other different food products that'll make you feel really lousy. But that's part of it. As you're flushing out toxins, many of these things will go through the liver, and again, the liver is no dummy. It's going to recognize that insult and push back and be agitated and kind of give those signs as well. So it's a great discussion. It's an important discussion because most of us, if not all of us, have some level of toxicity, whether it's still this amalgam filling I've got, or what I'm working with, the chemicals in my garage while I'm painting this week, or whatever it may be. And it's important for us to recognize the part that plays, toxicities, and being able to flush those out in one way or another.
Right, and I think one of the things that in the report that I went over with Regina is that I'm a bad detoxer. If you can, just a kind of a simple way of putting it, I don't detox very well. So even just in general, if I take medication or if I'm going in for dental surgery, I need to detox the pain medication out of my system because I don't do that very well. So I think some of the different protocols will help people. And then this actually tells you whether or not you're very good at detoxing or not, and which one, suggests which methodology might be better for you, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, again, it's a great point because as we get to the point where we recognize, what our status is, we understand our blueprint and our owner's manual, we look at our current blood status. Before we can go make those positive changes, if we still got poisons in our body, we got to get them out in one way or another. And so we just need to be respectful of that and do it in a safe and responsible way to where we get the recognized and the intended effect, but we didn't hurt ourselves or get too miserable in the meantime. And it's very effective when it's done safely.
Right. Wonderful. Well, that is definitely a topic for later discussion. So let's just make sure we put it on the calendar. And I thank you again, Gregg, and we'll certainly do this again.
Yeah, for sure. It's always my pleasure. Thanks, Cheryl.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We'll see you next time.
Have a great one. Okay, bye-bye.